My name is Lieutenant Commander Samantha Hayes, United States Navy. For over a decade, I have served in Special Operations Support, the kind of work that keeps missions alive without making headlines. I have been on flight decks in the middle of typhoons, in dimly lit control rooms watching live feeds no one outside our circle will ever see, and in rooms where silence holds more weight than words. None of that mattered on the day my younger sister Rachel got married. I was in my dress whites because she had asked me to, saying it would make the pictures unforgettable. I stepped into that reception hall wanting nothing more than to see her smile and avoid stirring up old family tensions. The room smelled of polished wood and champagne. A jazz trio played near the stage, their sound mingling with the low hum of conversation. I was shaking hands with an old family friend when my father's laugh cut through the noise. It was sharp, familiar, the kind of laugh that draws people in. I turned slightly, just enough to hear him say, "She's the janitor for the SEALs." The group around him chuckled, some politely, some with genuine amusement. My chest tightened. The words landed like a shove I had not seen coming, even though I had heard some version of it for years. I smiled the way you do when you are cornered in a briefing room, your rank questioned without reason. I told myself not to react, not to ruin Rachel's day, but the air in my lungs felt heavier. Every nod from the men at the bar was a reminder of how small he wanted my role to seem. I turned back to my conversation, though my mind was already drifting toward the exits. What my father didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that in 5 minutes his version of me would shatter as completely as the glass he was holding. And when it happened, every single person here would see me in a light they could never unsee. The wedding had started that afternoon in a historic brick church just a few streets from the harbor. Its white steeple rose above the narrow lanes of a Virginia coastal town that had been there since before the Revolution. Inside, sunlight filtered through tall, stained glass windows, painting soft colors over the polished pews. By the time the vows were over, the whole party moved to the community hall, a building with wide verandas and chandeliers that looked like they belonged in an old Southern novel. The breeze carried the faint scent of salt water from the bay, and the laughter of guests drifted out onto the porch where waiters in crisp black vests served trays of shrimp and champagne. It should have been the perfect setting for a family celebration. Colonel Robert Hayes, my father, stood near the center of the reception as if he owned the space. Even in retirement, he still carried himself like he was in uniform, his back straight, his voice carrying across the room without effort. He was a man who valued hard edges and battle-tested credentials, and anything less than direct combat never made his personal list of what counted as real military service. My role in Special Operations Support meant nothing to him compared to a rifle and a front line. To my father, titles like logistics officer or intelligence coordinator were just polished ways to say you stood on the sidelines. I had grown up in a home where rules were not suggestions, but the air we breathed. Chores were inspections. Family dinners could feel like debriefings. Praise was rare, and when it came, it was usually for something that matched his standards, not my own. As a child, I remember bringing home a science fair ribbon, proud of the hours I had put into my project, only for him to ask if I had joined the school's track team yet. Physical grit mattered more than curiosity. At 15, when I told him I was considering the Navy, he didn't ask what role or why. He just told me to aim for something worth respect, which to him meant special warfare or nothing. Even after I enlisted at 19, the pattern stayed the same. I graduated top of my class in technical training, and when I called to share the news, he asked if I had ever considered switching to a combat unit. The first time he visited one of my assignments, he walked through the operations center with his hands behind his back, glanced at the wall of screens and said, "Looks comfortable in here." It was not said with admiration. Every accomplishment seemed to pass through his filter of what was valuable, and if it didn't match his standard, it was dismissed with a smile that felt like a closed door. By the time Rachel's wedding day arrived, I had learned to brace myself for the small jabs as much as the big ones, the jokes about pushing papers. The way he introduced me to his friends was as if my job were a curiosity rather than a commitment. Standing in that elegant hall, I could feel the weight of years pressing in alongside the warm scent of cedar from the polished floorboards. I loved my sister and wanted this day to be about her, but part of me knew the familiar script with my father would play out before the night was done. What I didn't know was that this time, someone would flip the script for me, and the ending would not be his to write. 2 years before Rachel's wedding, I was assigned to a joint task force operating out of the Pacific. Our unit handled missions that most people in uniform never even heard about. It was late May when the alert came in, a humid night that clung to your skin and made the air feel heavier. 2 Navy SEALs had gone missing in the South China Sea during a low-visibility reconnaissance patrol. Intelligence suggested they were being held in a small fishing village with ties to an armed militia. Time was already against us. The longer they stayed, the smaller their chances of coming back alive. My job was not to carry a rifle through the front door, but to make sure the people who did had a way in and a way out without leaving a footprint. That started with securing an unmarked vessel that could hug the coastline without tripping enemy radar. We found an aging fishing trawler owned by a man who owed us a favor from a smuggling bust we had quietly smoothed over years before. I had 48 hours to pull together everything from encrypted comms to aerial refueling for a drone that could feed us real-time images. Every call I made had to sound like something innocent enough to pass through foreign surveillance. We built a network of false chatter, disguising mission orders as fishing schedules and weather updates. My small crew moved like a single machine, running on caffeine and stubborn willpower. By the second night, the typhoon warnings hit. Half the command argued to abort. I saw it differently. A storm that size would keep civilian boats out of the area and mask the approach of our vessel. It was a gamble, but I had seen storms save missions before. I greenlit the plan. We pushed a supply drop through the outer bands of the storm using a local cargo plane with a forged manifest. The supplies included medical kits, ammunition, and extraction harnesses designed for a vertical lift. The pilot flew blind for part of the route, trusting coordinates I had triple-checked against shifting wind patterns. In the operations room, rain pounded the metal roof so hard it sounded like a drumline. My headset buzzed with bursts of coded chatter. I tracked every moving piece of that mission like a conductor keeping tempo for an orchestra no one else could hear. When the extraction team radioed, "Package secure," I allowed myself one breath, just one, before pivoting to the escape route. The vessel hugged the coastline under the storm's cover, while our drone fed us updates disguised as idle fishing banter. They slipped back into open water without a trace. No gunfire, no casualties, no headlines. Just 2 lives quietly returned to the roster. The official report was 3 pages long. My name appeared once, buried in the list of logistics officers. I went back to my quarters after 48 hours without sleep, stared at the ceiling, and felt the kind of tired that seeps into your bones. There was no celebration, no medal, no story to share at Christmas. I carried that night like a sealed envelope, knowing the only people who understood were the ones who had been there in the storm with me. 2 weeks later, I was back stateside, sitting in my father's kitchen. He asked if I had done anything worth remembering lately. I told him no. That was the job. The honor was in the lives saved, not in the recognition. He moved on to telling a story about his days in the army, the kind where dust and danger made a man in his eyes. I listened, nodded where I needed to, and kept my story locked away. Some missions aren't meant to be told, at least not to everyone, but they stay with you, shaping the way you carry yourself in every room afterward. That night in the South China Sea had taught me something my father never could. Sometimes the most valuable work is the kind that no one sees. The reception had settled into its rhythm, the sound of clinking glasses blending with the low hum of conversations and bursts of laughter. My father had planted himself near the bar, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing as he spoke to a rotating circle of uncles, old army buddies, and a few family friends. I could hear him in snatches as I moved between tables, his voice always just loud enough to carry words like real soldiers and front lines. The people around him laughed at the right beats, some out of politeness, others because they believed they were in on the joke. Every so often, I caught eyes glancing in my direction, quick flickers of curiosity shaped by whatever story he was telling. I told myself to keep moving, keep smiling, keep the night about Rachel. A waiter brushed past me with a tray of champagne, the bubbles catching the glow of the chandeliers above, and I thought about how easy it would be to slip outside, away from the weight pressing in on me. But then another snippet of conversation found me. "Yeah, she's Navy, but not you know that Navy." The laughter after was short and sharp, like a cork popping. I passed a table where one of Rachel's college friends sat with a glass of white wine in hand. She leaned toward me with a smile that was more curious than cruel. "Do you actually work with SEALs, or is that just something people say?" Her tone was light, but the question carried the echo of my father's words. I smiled back, the kind of practice smile you use when you are holding a line in rough water. "I work where they work," I said. She looked intrigued, maybe even impressed, but I moved on before she could ask more. The music shifted to a slow jazz number, couples drifting toward the dance floor. I stood near the head table, watching Rachel laugh with her new husband, the soft light turning her veil almost golden. It was the picture of a perfect night, and I wanted nothing more than to keep it that way for her. But each comment I overheard was another invisible cut, and even the smallest ones add up. My father's voice rose again from across the room, followed by another round of chuckles. I thought about the nights I had spent in windowless rooms, eyes on a screen, heart pounding as pieces of a mission fell into place. No one here would ever know the names of the people who made it home because of those nights. No one here would ever see the storms I had walked through for a job that mattered more than any punchline. I kept my back straight, my hands steady, and told myself the same thing I had told myself in the service. Hold the line. Wait for the moment to move. Still, it was hard to ignore the sting. Years of being measured against an impossible standard had taught me to hide the hurt, but hiding didn't make it disappear. Each remark settled on my shoulders, heavier than the last. Somewhere deep down, I felt the familiar heat building, the kind that warns you your composure is nearing its limit. I didn't know it yet, but the breaking point was closer than I thought, and it would arrive in a way none of us could have planned. I was halfway through a forkful of roasted chicken when I noticed movement ripple through the far side of the room. At first, I thought it was a server clearing plates or the DJ testing equipment. Then I saw a teenage boy in a navy blue suit sitting near the dessert table, staring at his phone like it had just lit up with something unreal. His head shot up, and his voice cracked slightly as he said, "Oh my God, is that her?" It was loud enough for the people at his table to lean in. Then louder, "Oh my God, is that her on television?" The words cut through the chatter, the music, and even the clink of glassware. Heads began to turn, and a few guests shifted in their seats, following the boy's gaze. The phone left his hands and began a slow migration from table to table, each person taking a second to squint at the screen before passing it along with wide eyes. By the time it reached the center tables, whispers had started. Faces tilted toward me, curiosity sharpening into recognition. I caught sight of the video just as it made its way to a table near mine. There I was, standing in the bright lights of the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, my dress whites crisp, a row of medals on my chest. The chyron along the bottom read, "Navy officer honored for distinguished service in classified joint operations." My voice played faintly through the tiny speakers, words from the morning still fresh in my memory. "This award is not mine alone. It belongs to the team who carried the weight when others could not, and who brought our people home." Across the room, my father's posture shifted. At first, confusion, then something sharper. He was holding a champagne glass. His finger looped through the stem the same way I had seen him hold a rifle years before, steady and sure. But now, the grip faltered. His eyes stayed locked on me, as if he were trying to reconcile the woman in the video with the one standing in this reception hall. The silence in the room deepened, until even the faint fizz of champagne seemed loud. The phone passed again, and more eyes locked onto me. My father's hand trembled just enough for the stem of his glass to slip. The sharp crash of crystal against the polished wood floor made every head turn in unison. Golden champagne spread into a widening puddle around the shards. For a long moment, no one moved. My father didn't bend to pick up the pieces. He just stood there, his jaw tight, eyes still fixed on me. It was the first time I had seen him without a ready word, as if his map of who I was had just been torn in half. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks, and I knew without question that the night had just changed. Every eye in the room was on me, 100 faces caught between curiosity and disbelief. The phone had made its way to the head table, and someone near the microphone said my title out loud, almost testing the sound of it. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, is that really you?" I stood, my chair scraping the floor just enough to break the stillness. "It's me," I said, my voice steady, even as my pulse pressed against my fingertips. I stepped toward the nearest table, where the video was still playing. The image of myself at the Pentagon looked almost unreal, like watching someone I knew well but from another life. "Two men were stranded in hostile waters," I said. "We had no time, no margin for error, and we used weather to cover our approach. We got them out. I left out the names, the coordinates, the 72 sleepless hours. The truth was in what I did not say, and the room seemed to feel it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, from the back, an older man in a Navy cap stood. His arm came up in a crisp salute, the kind that carries both respect and understanding. Without thinking, I returned it. The motion was simple, but it felt like the most honest acknowledgement I had received in years. The wedding MC finally stepped forward, his voice light but deliberate. "I think we can all agree we have someone special in the room tonight. Let's raise a glass to Lieutenant Commander Hayes." Chairs shifted, glasses lifted, and the toast rolled through the hall. I let my gaze find my father across the room. He stood still, his hands empty now, his expression unreadable. There was no apology, no sudden rush of pride in his face, but I realized I didn't need it. The truth was out, and every person here had seen it for themselves. I lifted my own glass, letting the moment stand on its own. I slipped outside while the reception found its rhythm again. The night air was cooler than inside, carrying the faint scent of the harbor and the hum of crickets in the grass. White lights strung between the trees swayed gently in the breeze, their glow soft against the dark. That was when I felt a tug at my sleeve. I turned to see the teenage boy who had started it all, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. "I didn't mean to embarrass you," he said, his voice low. "My uncle's a SEAL. I've heard stories. When I saw you on television, I didn't think people like you actually existed." I crouched a little so we were eye to eye. "People like me?" I asked, smiling just enough to take the edge off his nerves. "What you saw in that video was one moment. The most important work is the kind no one sees. The work you do when no one's watching. That's the part that keeps people alive." He nodded slowly, like something had clicked for him, even if he didn't have the words yet. When I walked back toward the hall, I glanced through the open doors and saw my father laughing with one of his old friends, the easy grin back in place. If he felt differently about me now, he wasn't going to say it, and maybe that was fine. The mission was never to change him. It was to know without question who I was, and to stand in that truth, whether he recognized it or not. Inside, Rachel was dancing with her new husband, the skirt of her dress swirling in the light. The shards of my father's champagne glass had been swept away, leaving only the polished floor and the music carrying over it. I took in the scene, let it settle, and felt the weight on my shoulders ease. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had someone define you by the smallest thing they think they know, remember this: your worth isn't in their words. It's in the courage you carry, the work you do, and the truth you stand by when no one else is looking. That's the part no one can take from you.